Welcome to the Staff and Trenchcoat. I'm Raymond Magdallan here, as always, with my co-host Pope Jupiter.
Hello.
Today we are covering The Tusks of Extinction by Nayler. It is about 100-page novella. It's climate fiction, so well out of the scope of the normal fare that you will have come to expect if you've been following the podcast. But we wanted to stretch our legs a little bit, and I am at least glad that we did. And I think this was your pick, was it not?
Yeah, I wish I could remember exactly why I picked it because this is on the list of things we picked like 3, 4 months ago. But I also am glad we picked it. I enjoyed it. It was a heavy book, very dense, but worth it.
Yeah, it was a solid read. The actual prose is probably at the highest density out of anything that we've read in terms of he puts a lot of meaning into most of what's there. I would say compared to any of the texts that we've read, I found myself highlighting more in this book just because it was thought provoking, not because, oh, I liked that line or that line was
Yeah,
cringe or the normal reasons that I might highlight something. Very well written, very compact, and covering an issue that I think is very important. Obviously, the
yeah. I
narr
think it's especially important because it's not something like when we talk about climate change and climate catastrophe, we often focus on things like uh, coastlines flooding or crop failure, these things that will affect humans. The eradication of elephants doesn't materially affect humans, but the world is lesser if they're not there.
Yeah, and this book doesn't cover it, and I am not knowledgeable enough on the topic. I don't actually know a great deal about how important elephants are to the actual ecology, the circle of life. Like, what role do they play?
Right.
I suspicion that given that they've been essentially on the verge of extinction for so long, that probably they serve a function, but one that is not. It's not like losing all the algae or the bees or something like that. I suspicion that their extinction will probably not doom the world, but nonetheless, they are a species that are sort of emblematic. You can kind of imagine if aliens were to show up and kind of use symbols to represent our planet. I think you would probably see things like humans, elephants, lions, tigers, bears, dolphins. I think elephants fit into that category of sort of the most remarkable of species that are still extant. And
Yeah.
and the novella, does a really good job of presenting this heavy material, keeping the reader's interest. I think I said this to you yesterday or the day before. I would have struggled to read a 400 page, full length novel that was this heavy. I've had to read things like that I took several climate fiction courses in grad school. And I, really, it's the reason that I didn't end up specializing in environmentalism is because it is so depressing and there's so little hope. And this was, 6 years ago when I left grad school, and so I obviously that's probably only gotten worse.
Right.
But three cheers for any young graduate student that has the fortitude to just push forward and immerse themselves in reading this type of thing. But it is depressing. It makes you sad, and it would not be a thing that I would want to have to read day in and day out. But having said that, the author, I think, made a really good choice slating this as a novella and not a full length novel, because it's short enough that you can get through it and the emotional content is transferred, and you are forced to think about the issue of poaching and the ivory trade and all of those things. You are forced to face those issues, and I think that that's something that everybody should do at least once. And so if you're somebody who has never read an actual, capital C climate fiction, I would say this is a great middle ground for folks that don't want to read something that is much longer. Um, Quick side note, if you are somebody who is really interested in longer form climate fiction, I would recommend Richard Powers' The Overstory, which is a much longer treatment that is also, I found, quite depressing and weighty with the levels of critique that the author does. Um, so let's jump right in. In way of just an incredibly brief summary, we've got sort of a speculative fiction, climate fiction hybrid where
Yeah.
we have the character Demira, who has her consciousness transferred into a mammoth. We have also, as a point of view, a group of poachers, and then we have the doctor and the pair of Anthony and I forget his husband's name,
Vladimir.
Vladimir. Anthony is a rich piece of shit who has paid an enormous sum of money to come into the wildlife preserve and kill one of the male elephants. And then again, our second point of view is the group of poachers who have just killed a bunch of mammoths and are trying to get out of the reserve with their tusks. And then we have Demira with her herd, I suppose, of mammoths.
Yeah.
And the narrative begins with this device of describing the way that the herd will push the individual bulls out of the group, and it describes the way that they stamp their feet and they complain and try and rejoin the group for a while, and it is through this prolonged shunning behavior that eventually the bulls go off on their own, and the book is sandwiched with that device. It returns at the very last, and in what I thought was a very powerful exploration of that idea, with them
Yeah.
ultimately pushing out the last surviving poacher, whose name I can neither remember other than to say that
Stanislav.
yes, it was difficult to pronounce. Uh,
And this is one where I also read the book. I didn't listen to it, so we're both kind of sounding out names. And the author apparently has spent a lot of time in Eastern Europe. I don't know if you read the like acknowledgments and stuff at the end of the book.
I read just a bit of it. I didn't read the
Yeah,
entire thing.
but I also did a little bit of research about the author, and he did a bunch of academic work in Russia, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, all around that area. So, and I do think it kind of shows in the way the little glimpses we get of the world that isn't the mammoth steppe shows his international exploration.
Yeah, this is. I think it's worth pointing out that every other book that we've done for the podcast, I think the main thrust of the authorial intention is entertainment. I
Hmm.
think that just about everything we've read, maybe with the exception of the fifth season, but even in that case, I would say it was mostly the intention was to write a fun story for entertainment purposes.
Right.
This text is much more someone who has had a rich lived experience and academic background, and this is a protest piece.
Yeah.
This is an ideological piece. It is meant to do something to you when you read this. It is meant to change your perception and to draw into into the forefront of your attention these issues.
I mean, it
And
definitely did that for me. I didn't really think about the extent of ivory poaching that goes on, but it makes sense that it's a valuable commodity, and where there's a valuable commodity, people will do anything to obtain that. So, yeah,
absolutely.
it's definitely a message that that probably needs to be gotten out.
And so I guess turning to our very short bullet list for this text. There was a fair amount of violence.
Yeah,
I think it's worth discussing because we get this really interesting juxtaposition of the violence of survival and rebellion on the part of the elephants, the mammoths, and the vulgar and kind of senseless violence of the poachers.
yeah,
And there is the author does a really good job of giving the reader, or at least giving me, a very intense sense of satisfaction when the elephants just absolutely mutilate these poachers. I felt no remorse. There was only elation. I reveled in the bloodshed. And
yeah,
then when the poachers do violence, you get the polar opposite. There's this intense woe and again just kind of a hatred that is created when you read about what they've done to, particularly in the beginning of the story. There's a description of the elephants that have been killed and one of the babies uh, that is
yeah,
that had stayed with its dead uh, mother and kin until it starved to death or succumbed to the elements.
yeah. That
Um,
was one thing the author is very good at is portraying the pathos in the scenes. You know, you can feel the you know the righteous anger in the scenes where the mammoths are stomping on the poachers, and you can feel the sorrow and I mean, unfortunately, a thread of hopelessness does kind of go through it. It is sort of brightened at the end, but there's definitely, you know, that feeling like, you know, yeah, we've kind of got a good ending in this story, but that's this story.
right.
So yeah, it did a good job, and I really enjoyed the way he used memory to to especially with Demira to tie humanity into the mammoths and thus, you know, linking humanity to nature, the whole kind of meta message of, you know, we're part of nature too. You know, we are also we're not separate from this from these even these animals that have been extinct for millions of years. We're all part of the same ecosystem. We all are interdependent.
Yeah. What did you think of the author's choice to use mammoths instead of elephants? Do you think that was a choice based on the desire to enhance the sci-fi elements?
I do wonder if there was a little bit of the author kind of came to a point where I can figure out and create an area of, you know, Siberian steppe or what have you, where these animals could realistically be isolated and kept safe by obscurity that may not be possible in Africa. I don't want to ascribe any kind of, you know, assumptions about the author to that. But no, I don't I will excuse me, I will say that, I think it took quite a bit quite a large set of balls to have a story where you have both, computer backups of human brains and de-extinction uh, of mammoths, and those are just kind of footnotes. Like, that's not what the story is about.
Yeah, no, it's very much like a climate fiction with sci-fi elements.
Right.
Um,
So I don't know, because they do kind of ask that question, and his response is that he could create a safe step for the mammoths and perhaps one day resurrect elephants, or reintroduce enough numbers to make them you know, wild animals again. But I don't know if you have any insight or any thoughts on why he chose mammoths, or if you thought it was just like you said to enhance the sci-fi appeal.
I mean, that was my assumption, and I would say it was a neutral choice. I don't think enhanced or detracted from my ability to get into the story. Although it did create kind of one level of separation between the real and current issue of elephant poaching and, in this case, the mammoths. But
Right.
I think he
Because nothing in the story really helps to provide a potential solution. We don't have the ability to download human memories into a computer database and store them, let alone potentially re-upload those into another body. I feel like I'm kind of picking nits here because overall the story is good and needed to be told, I think.
but it's not a story of hope.
No.
Uh, Especially at the end, the in some sense it was the Demira's humanity that was driving her to, because essentially the scenario was by allowing one rich asshole every so often to kill one of the males, they would get enough money to protect the rest of the reserve. And Demira, using her human conception of the situation, would not allow that to happen. She was
Right.
going to protect all of the mammoths. And in doing so, by conceptualizing it in human terms, she was actually working against the the good, so to speak, in that sense, or the working against the easiest potential route for the survival of the species. And again, I don't think the author is telling us a concrete, simple thing there.
No.
He's pointing out a problem that does not currently have a solution, because if we conceptualize all of this in ways of thinking that have always been endemic to humans, then there isn't a solution. And the at a question I think that the piece does beg is, do the poachers deserve to die? And I mean, I have my answer, but what's yours?
I think in the, cold calculating, like, justice calculation, however you wanna put it, I don't know that I can say they deserve to die, but I do think that, uh, Demira's actions were righteous. And I know that's kind of contradictory, but, they I do think he did a decent job of showing that the poachers weren't is particularly the poachers on the ground, weren't necessarily the people who were benefiting from this senseless slaughter. I mean, how many times did Zlatislav say, "Oh, we're not gonna see this money. Men like us don't see this money. It'll get taken from us, or we'll get shot, or and I mean that's what ends up happening. The ivory, and I will admit there was a part that was like, I mean, there are four tusks like right over the ridge over there. I mean, it sucks where they came from. I understand it's horrible, but they're already there. Like, can we like just sell those and help fund the center? But I
You know,
understand that
one, I don't know a huge amount about how it works, but could they remove the tusks without killing the animals?
I don't know. I have to imagine that you can cut off the tusk that is, sticking out. But the author did went to pretty long lengths to talk about hacking open the face to pull all of the ivory out.
Yeah, because
But
it's the most valuable substance on Earth,
right.
and I don't know if that is true. Um, I would suspicion that uranium is more expensive.
My impression was that that was true in that world where elephants were extinct in the wild, and that they really didn't have there wasn't any access to virgin ivory except from you know uh, digging up corpses in the Arctic that they referred to, or
Right. Well, so I don't know if the piece specifically wants you to be thinking about this exact question, but it is one that that came to my mind. And because I think a defense that people would make is that in some cases it is the economic status of the regions in which the populations of animals that are widely poached exist and the industrial complex that created that scenario that push people into a life where their only outlet for acquiring any kind of modest wealth is through poaching. But I think
Right.
it begs a deeper question, which is, and I've heard this, you even get this in America, where if I understand it correctly, even for endangered birds and other species, you get exempted if you're in a scenario where you're killing them or you would die. You need to eat or so on and so forth. I believe you get an exemption. And I I think that at the individual level, you can't, if a man is starving in the forest and a some breed of hyper endangered squirrel or fox happens by and he kills it and eats it, I don't have any interest and I don't think it's valuable to condemn that individual because we're not in that situation. It's difficult to imagine how you would how your brain would function in that scenario. But looking at it from above, it's kind of one of those things where, 'twould be nobler to not to just like fall on your sword as opposed to killing off this creature. And I think it speaks to the idea of there are crimes that are, I mean, we have factory farming and essentially the mass slaughter of animals on an unimaginable scale that's going on. So poaching is hardly our only crime, but it does seem like there is a specific weight of evil and almost like an unredeemable element to killing something when it is of the last of its kind.
Yeah.
And I mean, I really think that the closest word that we have is genocide, but that isn't precise enough for this type of crime. It does fall into the category of it is a thing so odious that we don't have a specific word to label the thing that you're doing. And I'm not even sure where I was going with this particular screed, other than to say these are the types of things that I think the story compelled me to think about that I have often allowed to retreat into the far back reaches of my consciousness. It's not a thing that I sit and opine about on a daily basis, and I was not happy to sit and think about these things, but I was reminded how easy it is to just not remember that these things are going on as we speak.
Yeah. I mean that's kind of what I was saying. I didn't really think about this. Obviously, I know there are ivory hunters, ivory poachers, but I didn't really think about the scale that it would logically exist at in our modern society. I do feel there's a part of me, and it's kind of a petty part, but I feel like we need a different word to refer to the pieces of shit who go out and gun down elephants and hack them open for their ivory versus someone who like crosses over into land he doesn't necessarily have permission on to hunt an animal, maybe for his survival, maybe just because he likes hunting. And because I feel like those are, while they definitely have some similarities, those are two fundamentally different activities, right?
I think they're similar crimes. It's just that, as is true in our real, judicial system, motive matters.
Right.
I think one is more condemnable than the other, but I think from a pragmatic standpoint, the or I guess maybe more of a consequentialist standpoint, there isn't a huge difference. If there's five of a given animal that exist and you poached one or you were hungry so you killed and ate one, the end result is the same,
Right.
with the exception of in case A, one human survives for another day or another couple days. I guess if it was an elephant, maybe they could survive for quite some time. Definitely, they're different gradations of the
Mhm.
same problem.
Right.
And then there is this third category, moving on to Anthony, of the rich person who satiates their bloodlust through philanthropy, more or less. I mean, it's not really a donation, but he is
Yeah, I
spending an exorbitant amount of money to kill one of these animals, and that money will ensure the survival of many, many more of those animals. Um, and I think the author was very keen to have these passages where the his husband, Vladimir,
mhm,
says the line several times. If he pulls the trigger, I will stop loving him.
right.
And I do think that even though there is an argument to be made for, again, taking a sort of consequentialist viewpoint, that given the way humans are and the state of things, that type of rich person trade off might be necessary. I do think that someone that does that is a person who has become unworthy of love. They are a husk. They are a fetid simulacrum of what is a human, a
Yeah,
ghoul.
I got a little weirded out by the lengths the author went to try to paint him as a good billionaire, you know. They all hate each other and they none of them think they do any good for the world, but Anthony's different. He recognizes that he doesn't really do any good for the world and also thinks that no one else does any good. And it's like, okay, let's assume, because I think you can see an implication that all of those secret pictures on his secure terminal of him standing over these dead animals, that all of those were similar, like preserves offering him to pay to come and hunt this animal. That it was a similar, like, hey, you pay us $2 billion and we will let you come here and hunt this endangered lion or whatever.
Right.
Let's take that as assumption as read. So the only reason he will give money to a cause which I, I, I think everyone can agree it's a good idea to conserve particularly endangered animals is if he gets to go and kill them. The only reason he can he will open his pocketbook is if it means he gets to go and kill something no one else gets to kill. And this guy spent multiple sentences trying to convince us that, oh, he's one of the good billionaires. But it was only when he tried to shoot the mammoth that was charging at them that Vladimir decided he was incapable of loving Anthony. I hunted as a kid. I don't see an issue with individual hunting in general, but that kind of thing would. I definitely agree with you. I would have been out of there long ago. The first time I saw that secret phone of pictures, I'd be like, "You need a therapist, not a husband." I'm out.
Absolutely. Um, and I catch you? Were you saying that you are a proponent of recreational hunting?
Yes,
Yeah. So we have to hard disagree there.
that's fine. I think that part of this is just how I grew up. Recreational hunting also includes respect for the land and the animals you're taking. You know, it's trophy hunting where you take an animal, cut off its head, and you know dispose of the rest, or maybe just keep the pelt. That's abhorrent to me.
Well, right, but you
If you're
don't
going
need.
hunting,
Go ahead.
if you're going hunting, it better be something you're gonna consume. You're gonna eat it. You're gonna use the hide. I'm not saying you got to use every part of the buffalo, like the legends about the Native Americans say, but um, if you go out hunting and leave any part of the animal behind besides some blood, then that's not hunting. That's just killing.
Well, but I mean, couldn't you, if it wasn't just about the thrill of killing, then wouldn't there be an entire industry of like non-toxic paintball facsimiles of the weapons that you would use where it was, you were just trying to tag the animal and show that you were a good marksman or some other way to so that you didn't have to kill the animal to enjoy the sport.
So I definitely would support and approve of such a thing existing. I
But
will
I'm
say
saying
that the
I'm
reason
saying I
why
don't
such
think people would do that because it's not about all the other bullshit that people try and wrap into it. The killing is the point. It makes people feel like a man when they go out and and kill an animal. And most hunters that I know, they speak with this really grotesque reverence of the having to like walk up on the wounded animal and knife it to death.
Yeah, no, that's I will grant you there is a lot of really toxic shit in like hunter culture. I'm not here to defend hunting culture, but I hunting is and it may just come down to some hunting is something that I did with my dad and grandpa, and so it has a lot of nostalgia for me. But like I'm trying to think of it as objectively as I can, and like I guess this is kind of a problem of scale. Regular dudes going out to a farmer's land to hunt deer, or squirrel, or rabbit. Yes, a part of it is about the killing, but I'm speaking from experience here. Most of it is about I want some fucking squirrel meat. I want some rabbit meat. It's a different kind of meat that you can't really go to the supermarket and get. So, if you want it, you got to go out and get it yourself. And um
Right. Well, and I mean, our vegan comrades would quickly come in to lambast you for, um, is the desire for an alternate form of flesh taste pleasure a valid enough reason to go and kill something? I don't know.
yeah, I'm not even going to try to get into that argument because I don't feel like trying to defend my enjoyment of meat from vegans because I don't have a defense. I just like meat.
Right.
I recognize the accuracy and truth of uh you know the vast majority of arguments for veganism. I mean, it's definitely a part of it is I can't really afford to go vegan as a diet. Also, I live with my dad who does most of the shopping and cooking, so and he is never switching to a vegan diet.
No, and I mean, I eat meat as well, and my stance on it has always been that the best version of myself would not eat meat.
Right.
And like I strive to become that best version of myself, but also lots of vegans that I've interacted with are kind of dicks,
Yeah.
and I have often thought that that movement needs a better rhetorical style and spokesmanship, because I of the vegans that I know, which are relatively few, I know so many more, Americans who take the tact of it. I think a lot of people think it's a meme, but it's not. Like they hear vegan rhetoric and their desire to eat meat only increases.
Yeah.
And I think that's unfortunate. But I don't want to derail. I want to draw us to a quotation that is roughly related to this from page 61. It
I
was not
do want to just to cap off the vegan discussion. Most of the reason I haven't gone vegan is actually not meat. It's like eggs and dairy.
right.
But anyway, moving on to your quotation on chapter 6 or page 61.
It was not the animal, but the act that was cursed. The act of killing an animal in order to take something that was a part of them and turn it into something you merely sold. It was the act of digging in and disturbing the earth that was cursed. The act of tearing the banks from streams to gouge out ice age corpses. The name that I can't pronounce, Stivstislav,
Sviatoslav.
Sviatoslav, had seen the way the streams afterward were thick with silt and dying fish, the traces of greed swirling in the current. And I mean the text is replete with passages of this gravity,
Hmm.
and frankly, just beautiful prose. It just is. I think the best written thing that we've come across so far. With again the caveat that this is intended to be a different thing.
Right.
And then there to juxtapose with that from page 70, this is from the from Demir's perspective, I believe. They think they can kill us for profit. They think they can use us to pay for this place, tear our bodies apart, use our bodies for funding. And the you can almost feel the I don't know if I've ever heard the term funding spit with such uh, venom and vitriol
Yeah.
in that case. And there's this I get the impression that Demira knows that what she's doing might actually cause there to be more violence, but it is the hatred of the system in which she is a part that drives her to strike out at the poachers and the paying customer alike.
Right.
And then here is the quote that you were referring to with Anthony. This is page 75. No, it was power. Power was the ability to destroy without needing to do it not out of necessity, but as an act of pure excess, to do something to someone else simply because you could. And this was perhaps the greatest power of all, to kill something that no one else could kill.
Yeah.
And again, that's that is as good of prose as I think you will find in any work. It does the job magnificently. And I mean, we could just pull quote after quote, but I think that's enough for the purposes of this discussion. Um,
I did have one highlight I wanted to talk about, sort of in
Absolutely.
relation to our discussion about hunting and whatnot. It's on page 9. It was really early. Hunting didn't seem like a skill. You armed yourself, you went out into the woods, and you waited. And then you killed something that did not have any of the tools you had. And I read that, and I sat there, and I thought for a second, and I thought about all the times I'd gone hunting with my grandpa and my dad and my uncles. And I realized that that is an absolutely true statement. I still, have nostalgia for the hunting, and I still support the individual hunter, but that is absolutely true. There is skill in using a weapon properly, but that skill is secondary to every other advantage a human has in a hunt. Even if you're doing a traditional go out into the woods, it's just you and nature and your gun, you know, that gun is such a huge technological advantage over the animals that very, very, very rarely did we spend time out in the woods and not get something.
And I
Yeah,
mean, the human is outperformed by most types of nature if you remove the tools.
right.
The small mammals are too fast. I think there are ways that you can hand catch fish, but I think
Yes.
that is a like a very difficult skill. But then most of the larger animals, if you had to hunt with no weapons or tools of any kind, you would have to just kind of hide in a tree or something and jump down onto a deer, and they would probably kill you. And then,
Well,
of
the way
course, if
the Native Americans did it with buffalo was they drove them off cliffs.
but even then, didn't they have spears and bows and arrows?
Yeah, but those were mostly just made to get them moving. Like,
Well, that's the point. Could they have gotten them? Would they have been able to do that
true.
without the weapons?
And a
Um,
lot of it was also their mastery of horses,
right.
being able to ride horses to corral the herds. Yeah, yeah. No, you're even when they're not using the weapons explicitly to deal the killing blow, the ingenuity and technology of humans will far outstrip our non-sapient neighbors.
And then, of course, for elephants, bears, tigers, lions, all of that stuff, the human just loses without the benefit of their tools and probably dies in any kind of confrontation.
Oh yeah,
Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't know if even like like the biggest muscly bodybuilder guys, I don't know if they could kill an elephant even if it just stood there and let them. I don't know if they choke it or something. I don't know. I
I think
mean,
the only way they could possibly choke an elephant is if they let it swallow them and then they like deliberately tried to get caught in their throat.
right. And so the point that I'm making there is that on some level, the even the most you know the least charged version of hunting is ultimately an abuse of the one power that we kind of have, our intellect, over the rest of nature. it's it's a misuse of that power. It's an ignoble pursuit. And I think that this work does illustrate that pretty well, and especially given that one of the characters is embodied in one of the mammoths, and we get to see that even with their tools, if the animals begin to think about the situation in the same way that humans do, that sometimes even the guns and the as I said, the other tools are not enough.
Right.
All right. So in the interest of time, I did want to, just as a a tip of the hat, a nod to the author, the representation of the gay couple Anthony and Vladimir, I thought was executed really well. It was just there, and he didn't do any. There was no baggage. It was just, this is what it is.
Right.
And that is the. I guess I don't want to speak over you or speak for you, but I think that falls into the category of, the staff and trench coat approved methods of representation. I like to see instances where marginalized groups are included in the text in a way that normalizes them and treats them as just another facet of the human condition, and not as a thing that always needs to be explained to death in the text to justify its inclusion.
Right. Right. I totally agree. I would even go maybe a little step further and say that they made, if this story has any singular villain that isn't just humanity in general, it's Anthony.
Oh,
So
definitely.
making a gay guy the villain is also kind of, in a way, good representation because they can be assholes too. Queer people can be assholes too.
And if anything, Vladimir is kind of a hero in the story, as well as Demira,
Yeah, absolutely.
or at least Vladimir functions as the voice of conscience.
Yeah, again, if there is a a singular hero to this story, it is a combination of Vladimir and Demira. Although I do think Sviatoslav deserves some mention. I kind of liked his character. I liked the Russian kid who was forced on the poaching campaign and didn't like it and just ended up being the sole survivor.
Yeah, and then he kind of turns good guy,
Yeah,
and then there's that really powerful ending to the piece where Demira pushes him out of the herd.
right,
And, I guess if we wanted to extrapolate into the future, I guess the hope is uh, that he becomes something of a champion for the mammoths.
right.
in his own way, but walking his own path. So, any final thoughts?
I might look into putting one of this author's other books, especially if it's more of a traditional long form fiction story, on the list in the future. He definitely has an interesting style, and the world, despite being a mostly our world with a little bit further advanced technology, uh, it was an interesting world that was, I don't want to say unique or unlike anything we've ever read, but given some of the other like bog standard worlds we've explored on this podcast, I think he could bring some interesting stuffs to it. So look forward to that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I would definitely read something else by Ray Naylor, without question. All right, so next time we will be reading Road to Ruin, the first book in the Mage Bike Courier series by Hannah Lee, which is my pick. And I think I've done it once before, but this is an instance where I have selected an urban fantasy. And I believe, as the name implies, I think it's about a dude who has a magical motorcycle, or at least there's some, obviously the Mage Bike Courier. I don't know if he's a smuggler or literally he's transporting goods back and forth. I assume it's a quasi dystopia
It's
scenario.
actually an edgy remake of The Postman, that movie with Kevin Costner.
Okay, that could be cool. Uh, but yeah, I'm looking forward to that. It should be, to some degree, kind of a coming back to the standard type of fare for the podcast, because of course we had A Tempest of Tea, which was a YA fiction, and then The Tusks of Extinction being a climate fiction. And so now we're back to our regular fare of urban fantasy and high fantasy. And so we will bring you that in our next episode. And for Pope Jupiter, I'm Raymond Magdalene, and we hope to see you then. Hey, thanks for listening. You can follow us on Twitter at Staff Trenchcoat. Look for us on Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Feel free to shoot us an email at staffandtrenchcoat@gmail.com if you have a book recommendation, and we hope to see you in the next episode.